Hello, welcome pen friends. Welcome to day 4 of 30 Inks 30 Days. This is the ink I'm using today. It's Sailor, and I'm going to use the English words for it, tea green brown. So it's a very unusual ink, and we're going to see that. It comes from Ink Flight 29, and a pen friend, KS, also sent me a sample, so I have quite a bit of this. I've been able to be free to, really go crazy with it, and also I will have plenty to write letters with this evening, so I'll be able to do that. Okay, but first, let me show you how it came out of the bath test. The 20-minute submersion, and then I, let it dry after that. It acts a lot like yesterday's ink. It's got that resistance to water, but it changes its color. We're starting here at a kind of a strange color to begin with, kind of a brownish, greenish, goldish, unusual color. And then it goes to blue. Well, yesterday's was this one. So I've labeled up in the right-hand corner the day, the ink day. So yesterday's was green and it turned blue, and today's was brownish, greenish, whatever, and it turned blue, but a slightly different tone of blue. I just wanted you to see that before we hop right into the Bond Travel Gear ink journal, where I got started with this. Okay, and I think yesterday I might have forgot to show you how it's progressing here. Each day I come in with the broad nib and just color it in. It really looks unusual today. It's kind of hard to show it. It's kind of flattened on this. This is 68 GSM Tomoe River paper. Okay, so let's go on over to today. Now, this worked out really cool on this spread because both yesterday's and today's ended up together. So, this was much greener and this is much browner, but even so, we're getting a little distortion. But let's see, I probably should cover that because we really want to concentrate for right now on today's. So here it is in the broad nib, and the availability was similar to the others. I found it at Anderson Pens, $3.25 for a 3 mil sample, $15 for 20. And then at Gold Spot, I still found the bigger bottle, $18 for a 50 mil, and at Jet Pens, $15 for 20 mils. So that may change. This is just something I'm jotting down here for now, for reference. And it took about 15 seconds to dry, and that was really surprising to me, but there it is. And that was in the broad nib, the JoWo broad nib. So, moving on to the stub nib. Really interesting in that, but not as interesting on this paper as some of the other samples. So, but it did kind of leave an interesting... Well, it's hard to see it. I'm looking both places and I'm going to get dizzy. But there's just a little bit more interest in there, but not when the camera wreaks its havoc. 35 seconds to dry. And then with the fine nib, faster to dry, 18 seconds. I don't know. It was ho-hum on this paper, if you ask me. Where normally you get the best out of it on this paper, but these are my nibs. You guys may have something that really flexes and gives some kind of neat stuff. So here's the chromatography, and we might let's lift this up. So yesterday's was interesting too. The contents were somewhat similar, but very different. This was yesterday's green one by Sailor. Okay, so here we are. And then my first impressions were it goes onto the page green, but dries almost brown. At first I thought, what have I done? Have I gotten this mislabeled? What have I done? But no, then I realized it was one of those that it goes down looking like a nice dark green, and then it dries just so different. It's not like anything I've really seen. And I am probably a little more interested in it for the art aspect than letter writing, but that's just kind of early. This, with this 30 inks 30 days, it's 1 day per ink. Well, that's not very long, so it's just a mini kind of preview, and I'll be writing with it tonight some letters, so we'll see how I think of it. Okay, here it is on Rhodia 80 GSM white dot grid paper, and here it just seemed to change a little. Let's see if we can compare them. Sometimes it can be a challenge, but let's try. Whoop, there goes the paper. Okay, so do you see what I'm seeing? Maybe it just is the paper. This is much more pure white. Yeah, come to think of it, this is much more white. So it's looking crisper somehow, or browner. I don't know. Huh. This is a really hard one to examine. It changes under all conditions, and it's very unusual. So, tea green brown. Broad nib, 20 seconds to dry on the Rhodia. 25 in the Goulet 1.5 stub. I liked it in that, and I think that's the pen I'll concentrate on this evening for the letters. But that's what I did last night with the other one, and I switched right over to the broad nib because I'm not as comfortable with the stub overall, and it didn't glide the way I wanted it to over the paper, the other ink. But we'll see what happens tonight. And then this is a fine nib, Lamy fine nib, 20 seconds to dry, and I didn't like it as much in that, but then again, that's a normal statement for me. I like a bolder print or cursive or whatever it is. I like it to be bolder. So, oh, golly gee whiz, I'm still not turning it over. No bleed through and hardly any shadowing. So now I have to go back because I'm trying to train myself to look at the back of the pages. I think it really helps to see. Some people really want to know how much ghosting and so forth. So there is some, but it wouldn't bother me at all. And once you get your writing on this other side, this is nice paper, the 68 GSM Tomoe River. So no problems there. Let's hop onto CVS Caliber and see what it did on that. Okay, this is yesterday's, and too bad they're not facing. I didn't really plan that out. Okay, this really does change on here. It becomes a color I like better on the CVS Caliber paper, so that may be what I write my letter on, even though, you know, I usually use something different. It just depends how many pages I'm going to write and what size I want of paper. But I like this. I liked it better. Let's compare it to the Rhodia real quick. I think we have time. Yeah, something happened whereby it just changed the color just enough. It almost makes it look goldish a little bit. And then it starts to remind me slightly of another one that we'll look at, a Noodler's Rome Burning. It started to remind me of that, even though this is much darker. The tea green brown by Sailor is much darker. But see what it did? It lightened on this paper, and normally that would work against us, but I like it. I thought that gave it more interest and more... I'd rather write a letter on this paper with this particular ink, so I got to choose a nib. We'll see. Not great in the fine nib, so that's good. It runs it down to one of these two. Okay, before we go and leave that totally. Now, of course, this is CVS Caliber paper, too. It's a smaller notebook. So we're dealing with the same paper. But this is Rome Burning, and of course it is. It's much golder and warmer color, but doesn't that kind of remind you when you see it in the, well, the broad nib at the top, these two are the same nib, and it is darker on the right, of course, by quite a bit, but there's something that happens, let me turn it toward the light, that just, it reminded me of it enough to pull it right out by memory and look at it. So I thought you might like to see that too, because it's hard to pinpoint this ink, so we need all the help we can get, I think. Okay, let's look at the comparison panel, which it was really hard to do. I don't have anything just like this ink, so it was quite a challenge to come up with what's going to go on here and why, and there really isn't much of a good reason. I wanted to see yesterday's ink just to compare the two, and I think in a way that's good. So this is yesterday's, the green. Now I don't remember how to say it and probably lost my paper, so I'm not going to waste time on that, but you can see this was day 3's and this is day 4's. We're talking green here, and then we're really, it really looks more brown here in today's ink. So I put more browns around it, but there's nothing that compares to it, truly. But I did go ahead and put Noodler's Rome Burning on here because I think it deserves to be compared with that. It's got less permanence, less, it has less water resistance. Rome Burning turns purple versus blue, but it does I think I would have to say I believe Rome Burning has a little bit more, at least, water resistance, but not by too much. And it does that thing where it changes color. So really the brown ones, they just reminded me either in tone or overall kind of, but it just didn't really work. The Lita Tay by J. Arbon, and then Pelican Edelstein Smoky Quartz is unusual and has some complexity, or I don't know that I could call it unusual, but it's really interesting. So I put that on. And then we just profiled Monteverde Moonstone, which is much browner, but it has complexity too, and it had that reminiscence of an ink that just can't be categorized and compared with anything else almost. I mean, it just stands alone. So I really think it's really neat just based on that alone. And then Birmingham Black Mold, well, I don't know. To me, to my eye, this looks browner, like more closer to a traditional brown, but it's complex. It's got a lot of unusual qualities to it. And same with Birmingham Pumpernickel, but it just isn't in the same ballpark, really. Neither is Sepia. But I put them here because they came the closest to any sort of comparison, really. So let me grab just a couple of more greens. Diamine Classic Green. That doesn't help, does it? You see how far that is from any kind of what's displaying there in today's. And then Monteverde Olivine, same thing. I mean, gee whiz, we're not in the same, country. And then I just had a couple more browns that I don't think are already on here, but who knows. KWZ Cappuccino, I took that off, I think, to put Rome Burning, because I thought, well, yeah, we're talking about that burnished kind of look and very interesting, but these panels are very subjective because it's just whatever I think should go on it, I guess. But Kaveco Caramel Brown is very brown, very traditional, so that gives you a good comparison. And it is nice and dark, and it has some shading, so. Okay, all right, so maybe we should talk about what I thought about the ink. That's gonna be in the little pen thing notebook. Well, it's Ink Swatch Plot Log that Brian from the Pen Thing sent me. And here we go. Too bad that wasn't facing the other color, because I thought it was neat being able to compare them. It's looking really dark through here. That's what happens a lot of the times. So I put down as remarks, unusual. Reminds me of Noodler's Rome Burning. I thought that was weird, because when you really look at them, they look so different, and yet in a nib, there's something very familiar about the tone and how it comes through. So I thought it was well saturated. I gave it a high mark for saturation. Above average flow. It was good flow. Shading was a low mark because I really wasn't seeing much, but I suspect that you would if you had different nibs. And then I skipped bleeding and feathering again. I didn't have any of that, but I would if I was on mead paper or something. Dry time I thought was maybe average, dealing with the papers that we're talking about. No sheen, no halo, and no shimmer that I could detect. And I gave it an overall of 7. Just, a lot of that is, it's unusual. It was hard for me not to mark it on color alone. And color alone, it wasn't my favorite, but it is very unusual, and I think it's got all kinds of potential. So what I did was I ended up doing a Nick Stewart technique on it, and sure enough, it really was interesting what happened, but it did dry quicker. Like this part here where I was going to go in and do trees was right here. I made dots and they just sat there and looked like a big mistake. So I took a paintbrush and blotted it so that at least I could, still have this little piece. This is, loosely speaking, the Nick Stewart technique on today's ink. And, that blue comes out and you get a little variety, and it does actually start to look gold to me, or antique, which that made me get out the Rome Burning samples from the CVS caliber. So, I did do one other one. I did yesterday's. I hadn't been going to do that, but then these really interest me. So this was day 3's, and I did do that, and I thought that was neat how this one didn't dry as fast or get away from me, so I was able to put in a little bit of detail. So what is for tomorrow? For day 5. Day 5 is going to be another Sailor ink, and it's Grenade. And it's a really, woo, bright and deep red. Let's see if I can get a, if I hold it like this, then you start to see a little closer to what I'm seeing. Deep, kind of very interesting. And I love what's coming out here. A magenta kind of, or pink. Wow, that's interesting. But the big question today for everybody is the usual one. What do you think of this ink? You know, it's not my favorite color or color group really, but it's so unusual that I am happy to have what I have left, which is probably now still 3.5 mils or so. It started up there with maybe 6 or 5, something like that total, from 2 samples, and I like it, and I'll be interested to see how it goes tonight when I go to write a letter. And it's funny, and I'm gonna be doing a whole separate video on this, but it's funny my reactions sometimes when I realize this is my ink for all day, just this one, you know, and whether I like it or not. But when I sit down and write anyway, sometimes I can be really surprised. So that's what I'll be doing tonight. It was a really busy morning, or I already would have been using them more, the pens I do have inked up with this. But we had to run around and stuff, and it was a big storm. We got all soaked. Anyway, oh, wow, I'm going over the deep end. I'd love to know what you think of this, and also any that are similar to it that I don't have, because I believe there's some out there. I just don't have every single sample there is, which is a good thing because they wouldn't fit in my office. But all right, so I'll see you tomorrow with Sailor Grenade. We'll see what happens. That'll be a total change of color. So cool, and I don't fail to get excited about each of these inks. It's so much fun. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now.